I'd just like to welcome everyone on Ollie Ade's behalf. He's having some sound issues, and to welcome our guest speaker today, Helen Barge, Managing Director and Lead Consultant of Risk Evolves Limited. Over to you, Helen.
Thanks for that introduction, Julie, and welcome everybody to this call. Hopefully we'll get Ollie Ade back on the session at the end, because I think it's really important that he explains what's happening with the branch over in Nigeria. So just by way of introduction, my name is Helen Barge. As Julie's very kindly said, I'm the Managing Director of a consultancy company based here in the UK. And what do we do? We love compliance. We love everything to do with risk. We love everything to do with compliance. But specifically regarding the IIRSM, I've been a member of the community now for 4 or 5 years. Can't quite remember how long. I am a fellow of the organisation. And one of the things that we also deliver on behalf of the IIRSM as well is we also do the Managing Risk Essentials course, which is happening next month. And we're also just about to launch as well, in conjunction with the IIRSM, which we've designed for the IIRSM, a new course around the essentials of managing health and safety. So a quick plug for those 2 courses. It'd be absolutely brilliant to see people from Nigeria and actually other members of the IIRSM and non-members on that course. So what are we going to talk about today? I'm going to talk a little bit about information security and data privacy. And before you all go, oh, I've grown, Helen, that's it's a really important topic. I'll go through a little bit of the reasons why it's really important and why it's impacting businesses of any size, of any shape, of any sector across the globe. Unfortunately, this is not a local country problem. We've now got an international problem when it comes to information security and data privacy. We'll touch a little bit on the differences between privacy and security. We'll talk a little bit around the role of the IT team. One of the things I get told very frequently when we're working with new customers is, Helen, don't need to worry about that information security stuff. My IT team deal with all of that. And I just want to cover off a little bit about why I don't see that as being quite accurate. Importantly, we'll also look at our dependency on supply chains. There is a lot happening in supply chains, and that's where we see some of the threat at the moment to organisations. And then what I really want to focus on is, what is our role as risk managers? What part do we have to play in this journey for organisations? Julie said ask questions. Definitely ask questions as we go through. I want this to be really quite interactive. We'll pick up the questions at the end. If there's anything that I've said that you're not clear about, or anything that's particular to your organisation, then please ask. In the UK, I work with a number of different organisations. We've got a couple of organisations called the Cyber Resilience Centre in the UK. I work with them. I also work locally with the police, very much on the prevent side, so helping businesses and individuals from not becoming victims of crime. So in the news this week, it has been so busy from a cyber perspective over the last few days, last few weeks. We've seen breaches at Holiday Inn, we've seen breaches at Uber, we've seen breaches at Optus, who are the Australian telecoms provider, and we've also seen breaches at American Airlines. And I think one of the things we will have to think about and learn about from this is, well, why are these organisations being targeted? For some of those organisations, it's not the first time they've been attacked. For other organisations, it may be the first time. We may be seeing fallout. You know, the implications can be wide. So why do cyber criminals target these organisations? Now, I've unashamedly taken a slide that I was fortunate to see in a presentation I was fortunate to see last week from our National Cyber Security Centre here in the UK. I do believe that the collateral is available. Even if you're not based in the UK, you should be able to access the collateral that's on the NCSC website, and I provided the link for you there. When we look at cyber criminals, we need to understand that they operate very much as an enterprise organisation. You know, these guys are organised. They don't work as individuals. They work as organised crime gangs. They are exceptionally good at what they do, and they do work very closely to prey, if you like, on the weakness of organisations and individuals. Some of that will be financially driven. So when we talk about ransomware attacks, that can be just to extort money from companies. Some of that will be to sell information on. So we hear about the dark web, and yes, it really does exist, and they'll be selling information onto other individuals, other criminals, that information can then be used as part of future attacks. Typically, they will then they'll use things like ransomware, and I'll cover ransomware in a little bit more detail in the next couple of slides. Business email compromise, so this is phishing attacks. That's how they get in. You then may have insider threats, and talking to the police earlier this week in the UK, we were talking about a case where an insider, an employee within an organisation, had taken copies of data to use for their own purposes, not for the business purposes. And that again is a good example of where data and the world of cybercrime really meet each other. You know, there is value in the data that we hold as companies. On the far end of the spectrum, we may see nation-state attacks, and unfortunately we are seeing some of this as a consequence of the war that we've currently got ongoing in Ukraine. There's lots of really good articles about what the likes of Microsoft and so on are picking up as they see attacks being attacks on the various systems that we use. Again, that may not just be to disrupt companies, but we also see attacks on intellectual property that we have within companies. So an example of that would have been during the COVID pandemic, for example, where we saw companies that were working to develop vaccines against the virus that were being attacked. And that was just around the intellectual property, around the IP that they had developed, that they had built, that they had established, being stolen for other use. So it is a bit of the Wild West out there. I thought it'd be useful to share some key numbers, because if you go back to your leadership teams, it's useful to share numbers with them. And these numbers I took from the World Economic Forum. So a really respected organisation when it comes to thinking about how crime is managed. So according to the World Economic Forum, and the link to the document that I've taken this data from is there in this presentation. And Julie, I presume we're making the slides available after this session as well. There has been a 435% increase in ransomware attacks since 2020. I'm sure as organisations, we would love our businesses to increase by 435%, but this is about ransomware attacks on companies. Now, ransomware attacks are typically layered. They aren't just for one. So just for one piece of information, the attack that I saw locally, actually an organisation local to us here in the UK, they had a ransomware attack where their systems were locked out, individuals were locked out of their systems. They successfully recovered from backups to bypass that, and then they received a second ransom demand because the data that had been exfiltrated from the systems was then being potentially sold onto the dark web. So a double whammy. In terms of criminals, they're creative. They're running this as a business. So what we sometimes see is ransomware as a service. If you can't do ransomware yourself, they've got a service that they can sell for you. So again, very easy ways to get into cybercrime. And in the UK, we've seen a significant uptick in the way that cybercrime is being used. So for example, we've seen 117% increase in banking fraud compared with 2020 as people spent more time online. And I also, one of the things I pulled out of this World Economic Forum report was that in one case, a cybercriminal actually managed to clone the voice of a company director, and that was to authorise the transfer of something like $35 million US to fraudulent accounts. So this is a real problem. Counter that with, we've also got a significant gap in cyber professional skills worldwide. So in terms of trying to, if you like, fight and protect our systems, we don't have enough people around us to help and support us. But then we've also got this other challenge that we need to grow and become more digital for us to have successful companies. And the figure there is we're expected to see an $800 billion increase in the value of digital commerce by 2024. Now that's huge. That's huge. So in order to grow our businesses, we've got to become more digital, but we've got to be really mindful of the attacks that we could suffer as a consequence of growing more and more digital. Now, one of the key factors that we definitely need to make sure that everybody is aware of within our organisations is that 95% of these security issues are actually traced back to human error. And one of the things we also need to be cognizant of is that we need to be lucky 100% of the time, and unfortunately our criminal only needs to be lucky 1% of the time. So we need to make sure that we can keep these guys out of the system. So that's focused very much on the business side of things, but what about the human impact? So taking again the information from the World Economic Forum report, what you can see there is some figures around how people feel. What's the emotional consequence of being a victim of crime when you discover that something has happened within your systems, within your processes? And you can see none of this is good. So there's a human toll on our mental health when people do this to us. And you think about it, that's quite logical, isn't it? If your home was to be broken into, you would feel angry, stressed, vulnerable, violated. All those very real emotions from a physical crime are exactly the same as we see from a digital crime. When it comes to privacy, and I feel like I'm giving you lots of really negative messages here, but this is about positioning what the risk is to our organisations. Again, a global survey looked at the cost of a data breach worldwide, and this is across every sector. If you actually follow that link, you'll see the breakdown as well across all the sectors. But this is big business. This isn't just about paying and I really would encourage you not to pay ransomware, but this isn't just about the immediate consequences of a ransomware attack, of disruption, but this is also around the long term. If you can't take, I don't know, if you can't take orders online, for example, if you can't communicate with your customers, if you don't have access to your CRM system, if you don't have access to your ERP systems, this is the dollar impact to companies. So hopefully we'll understood now that prevention is absolutely better than cure. Important to look as well at the future. So from a privacy perspective, and if you think that privacy is the other side of the information security's coin, so information security is about keeping data safe. Privacy is very much around the rules and the regulations and the behaviours that we have around how we use information that's shared with us. We're seeing a different change, a beginning of the change of consumer behaviours. So consumers are becoming a lot more aware of their rights. I think that's really important. So we saw, for example, that they're beginning to stop the tracking of data. If you go onto a website and the use of cookies, for example, are being blocked if you use different search engines such as DuckDuckGo, others are available. So we're beginning to see consumers becoming a little bit more aware of the fact that they've got rights around how their data is managed. And certainly from a UK perspective, what we've begun to see is very much more of a no-win, no-fee approach to data loss. From a competition perspective, we've definitely seen changes in how new applications, for example, within Apple, by Apple, are being developed. They introduced in, I think it was 2020, different mechanisms of how they're accepting apps, and they were looking and being very public about how information was being captured and tracked within apps. Now that's led, according to the Harvard Business Review report, which I've also included the link for there as well, that led to approximately a reduction of about $10 billion worth of revenue for the social media sites like the Twitters and the Facebooks of this world. And add into this as well, and I know Nigeria is actually leading the way in some of the data protection legislation and some of the cybercrime legislation you already have in place, but we're seeing more countries beginning to put more legislation in place around how information is managed, how it's stored, how it's processed, how it's transferred, and the rights of the individual to how that information is managed. Now, within we've obviously got within the EU and within the UK, we have our good friend, the General Data Protection Regulation. Within that as well, we've got lots of other pieces of regulation as well around how data is managed, making certainly the EU the kind of the gold standard of privacy legislation. But we're also seeing more cybersecurity legislation as well coming into force within Europe. The NIS2, for example, some of you may have heard about, and the intent of that piece of legislation is to increase the cybersecurity framework and to make sure that companies within Europe are much more secure in what they're doing. So, with that as a background, what is our role as risk managers? You may well be thinking, yeah, but Helen, this is all information security. Perhaps I've got a data officer that deals with that. Perhaps you think it's, perhaps it's something your IT provider should be doing. What's our role as risk managers? Well, I feel that our role as risk managers has actually become much more important over the last couple of years than perhaps it has been. And our role of risk managers is to very much communicate this new risk, this emerging risk, and certainly this growing risk at a board level. So I feel that what you have to do as risk managers, very simply, to make sure that this is not perceived to be just an IT conversation. This is much broader than just information technology. You'll notice that I've gone through, I've not used much jargon around, what we should be doing on systems and so on and so forth. And therefore, from a risk leader perspective, it's really important that we demonstrate leadership in the boardroom and we challenge thinking to make sure that people understand that embarking on a new solution, potentially looking at a new customer opportunity, potentially looking at new supplier opportunity, we must be thinking about what about the data? What's going to happen to the data? We should also be thinking about, if you've been very fortunate enough not to have suffered any type of incident, we should be thinking in terms of a when, not an if this happens to us. What we do know is, and again, certainly when I go and work with smaller businesses, they say to me, it won't happen to me. I'm too small, no criminals interested in me. I don't have any data that anybody would be interested in. Absolutely you do. If you employ people, you have data that a criminal would be interested in. If you take money, pay bills, you have data that a criminal would potentially be interested in. If you develop products and services, you have information that from an IP perspective, a criminal may be interested in. And if you rely on IT, then you have an opportunity to be held to ransom just in terms of that disruption. They will not differentiate. And if you think about it from the criminal's perspective, the amount of risk they take versus reward. Who are you going to go after? Would you go after 10 smaller businesses or a bank? Who's going to have the bigger systems in place versus the smaller organisations? And we are seeing absolutely industrial levels now of cybercrime. So when we talk to boards, we must be talking in a when, not if. Now, we also think, having spoken about the risk, that one of the things that we're really good at as risk managers is talking very negatively all the time. But let's flip that on its head and think about what the opportunity is as well. If we can mitigate these risks, if we can put plans in place to ensure that we can reduce the risk of a crime happening, and if it does, indeed it does, that we can then quickly recover from it, well, that gives us the opportunity to focus on the stuff that actually we're really, really good at. It gives us the opportunity to go and talk to customers and clients and to say, yeah, we've taken these steps to ensure our business can continue to function and therefore not disrupt your business. And that all goes to really strengthen the reputation and protect the reputation of the company. And for me, when we talk about leadership in the ballroom, it's about being very transparent about what the risk is, but also talk about what's the opportunity of getting this right. So where do we start? It is a huge topic, and as I've said, I can talk for quite some time about this. From my perspective, it's really important that we identify the risk first of all. You need to think about what is critical to your business and think about it in terms of what data is critical to your business, what assets, applications and services are critical to your business. And then we take a risk-based approach to protecting them. We need to think about who we trade with. So if we didn't have a particular system available, would that mean that we couldn't trade with somebody? We then need to make sure that we identify how we can protect those systems, and that means making sure that we've got the right people involved. And we should also think about understanding, doing some threat analysis. So what could be the threat to those systems? Is it availability? Is it integrity? Is it the confidentiality of those systems? And let's be mindful as well that this isn't just an external threat. We should also think about the internal threat. What happens if somebody wants to disrupt our business internally? What happens if they want to take our data and sell it to a supplier, sell it to somebody else, set up a company based on perhaps information they've taken from within us? We should also prepare for what happens if we are compromised, and in exactly the same way as you probably do fire drills, for example. Let's do a cyber drill as well. What happens if you're compromised? What would you do? How are you going to do it? Rehearse these instances. And I'm hoping I've got a colleague of mine, Steve Watkins, on this call. He would be having a conversation with me if I didn't say consider ISO 27001 and ISO 27701. ISO 27001 is, as the name suggests, it's an international standard. It's the Information Security Management System standard. 27701 is the Personal Information Management System standard. These are two really great frameworks that will help you and help any organisation grow and strengthen their business. 27001 is just going through a huge change. We are expecting the new version of the standard to land in the next couple of weeks. 27002 for the geeks among us was available back in February. but definitely work through those framework agreements. And certainly what we're seeing here in Europe is that if you want to trade, if you want to be in the supply chain, then you are going to probably need these standards, certainly 27,001 as a minimum, in order to work with customers. Important to get the basics right. And I will talk a little bit tech here. So this is around talking about looking at your IT controls, including multi-factor authentication. It is probably one of the simplest ways of protecting your business, but you'll be amazed the number of customers I work with who go, oh, yeah, that's really annoying, Helen. I've got to put a PIN number in, or I've got to do something on an app. Please get it in place. It's a very simple control, and in many software applications, it's free to use. Think about least access privileges. Everybody in your company does not need access to everything. So make sure they only have access to the minimum within your organization, and those rights are controlled. Make sure that we have backups in place, and make sure we do security and privacy by design. Very simply put, that is, let's think about security and privacy before we do something, rather than thinking about it when something's gone wrong. And finally, never ever assume. Never assume that somebody else is doing something. We've just seen an instance with one of our clients where the in-house IT provider thought that the external IT provider was doing something, and guess what? Tasks fell down the middle. So make sure that you understand who's responsible for every step of the journey, and make sure that we've actually got owners of those assets identified. I mentioned about supply chains as well. So we are all in the supply chain for somebody somewhere, and we typically all have people supporting us as well. We choose our suppliers for reasons. They are really, really good at what they do. They help our businesses, but it's also really important that we make sure that they can't impact our business or our clients. Now, in order to do that, take a risk-based approach to identifying who your high-risk suppliers are. Do not, under any circumstances, look beyond the dollar spend that you have with those suppliers. It could be that you've got a very small supplier that you only see and deal something with a couple of times a year, or perhaps they provide you with a niche piece of software. They may be critical to your business. Do some due diligence with them. And I put in here that it's not an Excel agility test. We did some work with a client a couple of years ago, and they received a supplier questionnaire from their client. It had 702 questions in an Excel spreadsheet, and it really was an Excel agility test. We had to provide a huge amount of information going back to their client, and then no word of a lie, no word of an exaggeration. Their client came back within 30 minutes and said, fantastic, you're now on the suppliers list. There's no way that they could have consumed and reviewed 700 lines worth of data and supporting evidence to come up with a realistic solution. Once you've chosen your suppliers, continue to review them. Things will change during the lifetime of your relationship with your suppliers. It may be they grow, it may be they're acquired by somebody, it may be they divest some of their business. People will change. You need to go back and check, especially from those high-risk suppliers, that everything is still in place. And what we're also seeing as well is the need to collaborate. This is a team sport, yeah. It's not helpful to really make life hard for your smaller suppliers. They are there to help your business succeed, and therefore when it comes to cybercrime, we think it should really be very much a conversation, a collaboration with those suppliers to make sure that everybody succeeds in the supply chain. And one of the things we're doing more is actually conducting some joint business continuity exercises with suppliers in the room. So if that supplier was unavailable, what would we do to manage? Your teams are also important as well. Think about training them, think about doing phishing education with them. Absolutely critical that we do that. We did a piece of work last week actually for a client where we looked at the social engineering. So this is how a criminal would structure an email to get into your business with a phishing link. And we looked at the social media digital footprint for a couple of key individuals within the organizations. For one of those individuals, when we did their social media digital footprint analysis, we were able to understand where they lived, what their house was sold for, what they voted in the last election, the names of his two daughters, the ages of the daughters, the wife's name, the brother's name, the sister-in-law's name, where they lived, the information was just massive, and it would have been very, very easy to have constructed an email that we could have got into a system just based on what he was putting out on Facebook and Twitter and goodness knows what else. Involve your teams. Ask your teams for ideas and feedback. You know, your teams are absolutely brilliant at what they do. Ask them for ideas on how you can best support them with CPD education and what they can do to ensure that your business is respected. Explain the threat and explain why you put controls in place. Your IT teams will probably put controls in place to make sure that systems aren't breached. It's not a question then if your teams do everything they can to work around those. And consider, and I can see a spelling mistake there, my apologies, consider remote workers. What happens if you've got people working away from the office? How are you making sure that that they are kept safe and secure? Zero trust. So zero trust is, Gartner is predicting that 60% of organisations will embrace zero trust as a starting point for security by 2025. So that's just around the corner. And zero trust is very simply that each staff member will only see and interact with applications that they have access to, and that you then have as well multiple layers of authentication to make sure that it really is the person accessing the systems and not somebody that's posing as them. It may have an impact on employees, so there's lots of speculation as to whether it will be positive because they are not going to be bound up in so much red tape, if you like, in terms of trying to get through multiple systems. But also just think about the word zero trust mean for employees. I think we need to do a little bit of a selling action there as well to make sure our employees are on board. Think about what happens when things go wrong. If anybody is a health and safety manager here, then you have really, really great controls on what happens when things go wrong. It's exactly the same in the digital space as well. We need to think about what might happen if our systems are compromised, what might happen if our data is leaked onto the dark web, what would we do? And my top tips on this one are think way beyond IT. We run some business continuity exercises for clients, and we focus a lot, not just on the technical measures that they have in place, but also thinking about how they're going to do communications. When are they going to communicate with their insurers? Have they got cyber insurance? Have they got crime insurance? Are there any instances when you may actually consider paying a ransom demand? Now, we would never, ever, ever recommend that you do this. However, one of our clients has said, you know, if there was a risk to life, then they would absolutely consider it. What's your legal obligations, and are there any points when you would get the authorities, such as the police, involved? Do you have to report in country to any individual? So, for example, in the UK, if we are aware of a data breach, we have to report it to our information commissioner within 72 hours of being made aware of that breach. Think about what might happen to your business processes. Can you take orders from customers? Can you deliver and dispatch goods from your warehouse? What would happen with those health and safety systems if they were compromised? I did a IIRSM presentation, again, pre-COVID, and somebody came up to me at the end of it and he went, now I get this, Helen. I work in a factory that produces brine, and now I understand why there's so much focus on the cyber integrity of our industrial control systems. He said, because if the manufacture of brine goes wrong, then you can actually produce chlorine, and clearly chlorine is not a great chemical to be releasing into the atmosphere or to individuals that may be nearby. Think about other operations such as payroll. If you can't pay your people, how are your people going to feel? If you can't pay your customers, if you can't pay your suppliers rather, how are you going to continue to trade if you haven't got access to systems? And through all of this is communication. Who is going to communicate? How are they going to communicate? What are they going to communicate? And when are they going to communicate? Having good preparation will help formulate how you're going to communicate and what you're going to communicate. Are you going to tell everybody everything? Are you going to tell just some people something? Looking back to those 4 breaches that I mentioned right at the top with Uber, with Holiday Inn, with American Airlines, and with Optus, the Australian company, they all had comms plans in place. They had people that would reach out and control some of the information that was happening in the media. You may want to do the same within your organisation. So you can see how it's suddenly not just an IT problem. This is a business problem which requires business and leadership thinking. And finally, keep the end in mind. we've got to keep the benefits of this in mind rather than just necessarily focusing all the time on what the negatives are of systems being down and reputational damage. What we're looking to do with this is to make sure that we have resilient organisations that can respond, react, and recover from any potential cyber attacks that are happening to them, whether that be internally or externally. It does mean that we'll be able to embrace the future in a much more better and constructive way. If you've got an understanding of what your key systems are and what your data is, then you'll know and understand how you can embrace future developments that are coming forward. You absolutely will be more competitive. You will be able to go to prospective clients and customers and say, we do X, Y, Z in order to protect both your data and our ability to continue to deliver to you. It does support ESG goals. So two of the ESG goals that have come from the UN, the Sustainable Development Goals, relate to information security and data privacy. So by just doing the basics that you're doing within your business, you actually position yourself from a stronger ESG perspective as well. And definitely focus on the positive. It's always useful to speak from a positive perspective. So I've spoken now for about 30 minutes. Julie asked me to speak for about 30 minutes. And I just wanted to summarise. Your role as risk managers is absolutely critical. We are there, and I've put to drive informed decision making. This is about putting informed debate, jargon-free, on the table with your leadership teams. We do need to make sure that we have good stakeholder engagement in order that we can have informed discussions and debates on how cyber risk, on how information security, and how important data privacy is to your businesses. Manage your suppliers, but manage suppliers in a collaborative way. Manage your suppliers to understand what the risk is that they present to your organisation and consequently what risks they have within their organisation. Perform horizon scanning. I've given you some links there to the likes of the World Economic Forum, to the Harvard Business Review, to Statista, to the National Cyber Security Centre here in the UK. Identify where you can go for current information about what's happening within your sector, within your industry, within your company, within your country rather, about the current risks and threats that you may be seeing. And finally, remember the benefits. Let's focus on the positive here. Why are we doing this? We're doing this to prevent things from going wrong. So, and on that note, Julie, I shall shut up and I shall ask whether or not we've got any questions.
Thank you, Helen. That was a really good presentation. To answer one of your early questions, yes, I will be sending out the presentation.
Fantastic.
Together
Thank
with
you.
Your contact details after the event. I didn't want to interrupt your flow by coming on microphone. I don't have any questions coming as yet, but I wondered if Oluyede would like to do the branch updates and we can come to the questions afterwards, give people a chance to think about the content. Are you with us, Oluyede? We still can't hear you. Okay, Oluyede must be having some technical questions, but in the meantime, we've had a question in from Tony. So this is: do you feel that the data we provide when registering for events such as webinars, that it will include contact details, should be held more confidentially? I don't think I've read that very well, but I'm sure you got the gist of it.
I got the gist. I got the gist. Oh, that's a good question. I love questions when it comes to contact details. So the key for me, Tony, is this is around transparency. So what is going to be, what information is going to be captured about you? Where is it going to be stored? What's it going to be used for, etc., etc. And yes, it should be held. It should absolutely be held securely and not shared with others. I think it's important that you understand what that information is going to be used for. So what you don't want to do is attend a conference and then find that suddenly you're getting goodness knows how much junk email in from somebody else because your information is being shared. So two aspects for me. One is transparency, what's going to happen to your data, and absolutely security.
Great,
security should happen with everything. Yeah.
Thank you. And then we've got a question from Steve. It's in two parts. I think he qualified his question. So do you have a preferred model or method for assessing information security and data privacy risks?
So the model and method that we use is we use the ISO 27001 and ISO 27701 schemes for information security and data privacy. The model in terms of understanding risk-based approach is what's the data you're collecting, why are you collecting it, do you need it, etc. and who are you sharing that information with, and what's the criticality to your business. We work on my principle is of not holding information that we don't need. Steve, I don't know whether that answers your question or whether we can bring you into a conversation.
We can't bring Steve on the line, but Steve, if you're there and you want to add anything, I'll go to the next question and then we can come back to it if you want any more information. So we have another question from Tony. Do you have any information or advice that can be given which may assist with testing the business cybersecurity?
Yep, so there's external tools, so you can do penetration testing, for example, and I would recommend those on a regular basis using schemes such as Crest. So get a Crest supplier, don't just pick anybody that can do, I'm guessing Tony may well be in the UK, a Crest supplier, yes. So make sure that they have got the right credentials to test your system. Work with organisations, work with your IT providers to look at vulnerability assessments, so looking inside, going out. And then from a UK perspective, I would always recommend a scheme called Cyber Essentials. So Cyber Essentials is, as the name suggests, it's a scheme that's developed by the National Cyber Security Centre, and it covers 5 key areas which are essential cyber controls within your organisation. Now, even if you're not within the UK, I would encourage you to go to the NCSC website and you can find out more information about the Cyber Essentials scheme there and adopt those controls. It's a scheme that is available in more than one country.
Great, thank you. So there's no more questions. Oliade, I think we have you back on the line now.
Yes, I've been online. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now. Do you want to give the Nigeria branch updates, please?
Yes, I can go ahead with that right away. Sorry for the communication.
That's okay, not a problem.
Yeah. So IIRSM Nigeria branch updates. We have been having a lot of activities, and some of those activities involve the last collaboration we had with the World Safety Organization, WHO, for a collaboration for the just concluded conference they had. We are also having regular webinars, such as is going on at the moment. We have a webinars on myriad of risk management activities in different fields. We also hold physical events such as social dialogues, where we collaborate with different government agencies to discuss various risk issues that are emerging, the emerging ones, and even the ones that have been in existence. And also, we are also having collaborations with institutions in the academics. We have student membership. So, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So I said we also have collaborations with the academia, and on the global IIRSM, there are a lot of activities coming up, which we are going to be sharing with members after this webinar. You will send to your emails. You will have updates on all those global activities. And after this webinar, also we also like to let every member of IIRSM Nigeria branch to be aware that there will be a meeting. We will be having a branch meeting, and intending members are also welcome to that branch meeting. Thank you very much. That's the update for now.
Thank you for that. And we've just had clarification in from Steve, Helen. He said, sure, I get the value of 27,001 and 27701. I can never say that properly. But I was wondering if you have any other reference points. I tend toward ISO 27005, BS 77993, and BS.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I agree with Steve. Yeah, absolutely. So so Steve Watkins is on the session. So Steve and I were on a British Standard Committee that did a standard called BS 31111, which is around cyber resilience in the boardroom. So Steve, you're absolutely right to call me out on that one. Yes, there's lots of different frameworks that are out there. So if you look beyond the UK, we've also got the NIST framework as well from the US. There's many frameworks that can be used. 27002 is a good framework to look at as well in terms of how you then comply with 27001. I think the important thing is you need to start doing something. This is a risk that is not going to go away, and there's lots of people around you that can help and advise and guide what is right for your business.
Thank you for that. It's very comprehensive and a very poor question reading on my part. I have a question here for Oluyede asking if we have a platform where members in Nigeria can communicate. We haven't seen anything of it. I can have a chat with you offline, Oluyede, about setting up a WhatsApp group for the members in Nigeria, and then we can share that with members, and then hopefully we can get back to Gabrielle about that.
Yes, we have a lot of platforms where Nigeria branch members meet. I think we can add up whoever is interested in joining that platform. We'll share it soon afterwards.
Okay, thank you. I'll send you Gabrielle's details and then you can send it to him. So that leaves me to thank Oluyede for welcoming Helen today and for organising this webinar for the Nigeria branch members. And I'd like to thank Helen for your excellent presentation. I will send out your presentation slides and contact details to those that are in attendance today, and you will get your CPD certificates about this time tomorrow. So I'd like to wish everyone a good afternoon or a good evening, whether you are in the world, and I hope to see you at the next Nigeria branch webinar. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you, everyone. On behalf of Dr. Eugene Itwa, who is unavoidably absent, is the chairman, Nigeria branch. He sends his greetings.
Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye.